For a fleeting period, Amy Robsart seemed to possess everything: beauty, youth, and marriage to Robert Dudley, a favoured man of Queen Elizabeth I and one of the most powerful figures in England. However, one fateful September day transformed Amy's life into a lasting Tudor true crime mystery. Caught in a deadly love triangle between her husband and the Queen, Amy's suspicious death ignited rumours that persist to this day, though modern historians offer a more complex truth. Born into comfortable circumstances in 16th century Norfolk, Amy Robsart, the daughter of a gentleman farmer, received an education superior to many of her contemporaries, including literacy and Protestant faith training. Yet it was her connection to Robert Dudley that propelled her into the higher echelons of society. At 19, Amy met Dudley, a handsome and ambitious man of the same age with royal connections. In an era where marriage was primarily a political tool, Amy and Robert's swift and genuine love was an anomaly. Their engagement seemed like a storybook romance, though even at its inception, shadows lurked. Amy's substantial inheritance was contingent on both her parents' deaths, leaving her financially dependent on others, particularly her new father-in-law, John Dudley, the Earl of Warwick. Despite the Dudley family's lukewarm acceptance of the match, Amy and Robert's June wedding was a notable event, held at the royal palace of Sheen and attended by the young King Edward VI. However, even this joyous occasion was tinged with disapproval, as love matches were considered unseemly. Baron William Cecil famously dismissed it as a carnal marriage. For the initial years of their marriage, Amy enjoyed the life of a well-provided noblewoman, maintaining a fine household and regularly attending Edward VI's court alongside her husband. They also resided at various Dudley estates. Trouble began to brew in May 1553 with the marriage of Amy's new sister-in-law, Lady Jane Grey, to Robert's younger brother, Guildford Dudley. Unlike Amy, Jane, a cousin to King Edward and great-granddaughter of Henry VII, was a significant political asset for the ambitious Dudley family. Their ultimate motive became terrifyingly clear. The young, sickly King Edward VI was dying without a clear Protestant heir. John Dudley, who effectively ran the government, had orchestrated Jane's marriage with the aim of placing her on the throne, bypassing Edward's Catholic sister Mary and even his Protestant sister Elizabeth. By July 1553, Edward was dead, and Dudley's machinations had succeeded, forever altering Amy's life. Amy Robsart awoke on July 10, 1553, as the sister-in-law of the new Queen of England, Lady Jane Grey. The Dudley clan had seemingly secured their power. However, Jane's reign was short-lived. Mary Tudor, rightful heir to the throne, swiftly raised an army, and within days, Jane was deposed and imprisoned. The Dudley dream had vanished. In the wake of this scandal, Amy found herself at the centre of the fallout. Her husband, Robert Dudley, who had led forces against Mary, was arrested and imprisoned in the Tower, facing a death sentence along with most of his family. Amidst these grim prospects, Amy displayed remarkable devotion. She regularly visited Robert in the Tower, demonstrating her loyalty. However, while Amy was playing the dutiful wife, Robert's time in the Tower also brought him into contact with Princess Elizabeth, Mary's half-sister, who was also imprisoned due to the political upheaval. This meeting marked the beginning of a relationship that would cast a long shadow over Amy's life. After weeks without her husband, Amy faced further tragedy. In August 1553, her ambitious father-in-law, John Dudley, was executed. Queen Mary had demonstrated her willingness to eliminate her enemies, and the younger Dudleys were next in line. Amy bravely continued to support Robert, but the execution of her brother-in-law Guildford, shortly before Lady Jane herself, must have filled her with dread for her husband's fate. 6 long months passed, before Amy received heart-stopping news in October 1554. Through the Dudley family's efforts to befriend King Philip II of Spain, Queen Mary's new husband, Robert, and his surviving siblings were finally freed. Amy's husband was at last by her side. However, Dudley's return was no fairy tale ending. They were only welcome at Queen Mary's court when King Philip was present, and while he favoured them, the Queen remained hostile towards the family. Furthermore, most of the Dudley ancestral lands had been seized, leaving them financially precarious. For years, the couple lived a hand-to-mouth existence, dependent on the generosity of relatives, a humiliating come-down for those who once seemed to have everything. Around the time of Robert's release, Amy suffered another blow with the death of her father. A few short years later, in 1558, her mother also passed away, leaving Amy with few close family members. With her parents gone, Amy could finally inherit the estate promised in her dowry. However, her marriage to Robert was beginning to unravel. After years of marriage, it was clear that Robert was not the Prince Charming she might have envisioned. He was described as having very little sense, somewhat capricious and unthinking. Upon his return from the Tower, Dudley was deeply in debt, a situation that worsened over time, often bringing shame upon Amy. While Dudley sought to regain favour, even fighting for the crown in France, Amy was left to settle his debts in his absence. By 1558, Robert Dudley was firmly in Princess Elizabeth's favour, a fact made obvious when Queen Mary officially reinstated him and his siblings in blood at Parliament. Like her half-brother Edward VI, Queen Mary was always sickly, and by the fall of 1558, her death was near. Her husband, King Philip, summoned Robert Dudley to court as one of Elizabeth's close friends. It's possible Amy had only vague suspicions then, but everything would change after Mary's death in November 1558. Elizabeth ascended the throne as Queen Elizabeth I and profusely rewarded her favourite, Robert Dudley, making him Master of the Horse. This prestigious position, while suited to Amy's athletic husband, came with significant strings attached. Dudley was now obligated to spend extended periods away from Amy, attending the Queen in London. Elizabeth made it clear that his place was at court, not with his wife. Amy, meanwhile, increasingly needed her husband's support. Often residing with friends as her ancestral home was uninhabitable, she began experiencing worrying symptoms, likely breast cancer. Queen Elizabeth's reaction to this news was startling. By then, the Queen's deep affection for Dudley was evident to all. Rumours circulated that Elizabeth hoped for Amy's death to clear the path for her to marry Dudley. Despite ongoing marriage negotiations for herself, Elizabeth seemed to stall suitor after suitor, seemingly holding out for Dudley and infuriating her court. While Amy was unwell in various locations across the English countryside, her husband engaged in suspicious activities. Court gossip suggested he indulged in numerous affairs due to his influence, and even that the Queen visited his chambers day and night. Observers noted the stark contrast between the Queen's lavish treatment of Dudley and her coldness towards Amy, never inviting her to court and keeping her isolated in the countryside, a far cry from their early married life. Robert Dudley's response to Amy's serious illness was notably cold and detached. He seemed to prioritise his position at court over his ailing wife, visiting her for a mere few days during Easter in 1559. The bloom of their early love match had clearly faded. Amy, it seemed, had to take matters into her own hands. The longest period she saw her husband around this time was in May 1560, when she travelled to London for about a month to be near him. Upon her arrival, her appearance reportedly shocked the court, who had heard of her dire condition. By the end of her visit, she seemed to show some improvement, though the Spanish ambassador noted her poor appetite. The same ambassador, however, harboured a dark theory. Observing Amy's health and Queen Elizabeth's stalled marriage negotiations, he suggested a diabolical plot. Robert and the Queen were poisoning Amy, with Elizabeth delaying her own marriage plans. Reportedly, around this time, Robert Dudley confided that within a year, his position would be very different. Some interpreted this as a plan to divorce Amy and marry the Queen. However, no divorce materialized. Tragedy and infamy struck first. By the end of summer 1560, Amy had left Robert Dudley in London. By December, she was lodging with friends at Cumnor Hall, where she had luxurious apartments. Tragically, she would never see her husband again. Despite her recent health scare, Robert Dudley remained firmly away, attending Queen Elizabeth at Windsor Castle. In September 1560, Dudley received a message that would forever stain his name. On September 8th, a messenger informed him that Amy Robsart was dead, having fallen downstairs at Cumnor Hall. She was only 28 years old, and she and Dudley had no children. Amy's household was in utter confusion, and a shocked Dudley sent his steward, Thomas Blount, to investigate. From the outset, two grim questions loomed: tragic accident or foul play? The answers Blount received offered little comfort. The coroner's report revealed Amy had sustained 2 head injuries and a broken neck. Blount's further inquiries painted a disturbing picture of Amy's demeanour in the preceding months. Witnesses described her as anxious and nasty. On the morning of her death, she had insisted on going to a fair and then raged when her retinue suggested it was improper. Blount wrote to Dudley that he had heard diverse tales of her that maketh me judge her to be a strange woman of mind. Amy's maid even suggested that Amy, in her emotional turmoil, might have had an evil toy in mind and thrown herself down the stairs in despair. Despite the unsettling accounts, the inquest ruled Amy Robsart's death a true accident, stating she fell precipitously down from a certain chamber. For many, this provided a semblance of closure, but further shockwaves were to come. In the days following Amy's death, Dudley planned her funeral, went into mourning for months, and stayed away from court for a significant period. Though he did not attend the funeral, common for the time, he spent a considerable sum on her send-off. While some saw this as a sign of guilt for neglecting Amy, many in Queen Elizabeth's court believed Dudley was directly responsible for her death, seeing it as a means to marry the Queen. However, the scandal surrounding Amy's death had the opposite effect. The intense rumours, even among those who didn't believe Dudley guilty but opposed his marriage to Elizabeth, made him persona non grata at court. While modern historians largely dismiss the idea of Dudley's involvement in Amy's death, citing his genuine bewilderment and the lack of any real gain from such a scandal, he undoubtedly paid a heavy price. Dudley eventually returned to Elizabeth's court in October, likely hoping to marry the Queen. By then, however, Elizabeth understood that marrying the man whose name was so tarnished was impossible. Thus, Amy Robsart's end may have altered the course of the English monarchy. The truth of her final moments, however, remains elusive. While most experts lean towards an accident, the possibility of a desperate, alienated Amy taking her own life remains a haunting and perhaps the saddest explanation of all.